shall sit upon my grave, and will dead lips to speak. Why dost thou weep upon my grave, and will not let me sleep? My breast it is as cold as clay, my breath is earthly strong, and if you kiss my cold clay lips, your days they won't be long. How oft on yonder grave, sweetheart, where we were wont to walk, the fairest flower that e'er I saw has withered to a stalk. When will we meet again, sweetheart? When will we meet again? When the autumn leaves that fall from trees are green and spring up again. How oft on yonder grave, sweetheart, where we were wont to walk.
Remarkable recovery after literally being frozen solid.
Fairest flower that e'er I saw has withered to a stalk.
Human beings are animals. We've adapted and evolved to the point of being able to survive some of the most extreme and harshest of conditions. Whether through durability of the human body or through the ingenuity of the human brain, we find a way to survive. What if I told you that a legend and tale lives on today from America's distant past, a peculiar tale that lived once in the 17th and 18th century, nearly unbelievable to imagine, that of human hibernation, also known as the Vermont Deep Sleep. Today we'll examine this old tale of folklore and how its future implications may seem more feasible than we imagined. The tale goes that one day in 1939, a man named Albert Stevens made a puzzling discovery while sorting through some possessions of his late mother. A bizarre newspaper clipping. The newspaper clipping speaks of how in a rural, poor Vermont family of the past, the elderly and infirm were to be put in a sort of hibernation state so that others wouldn't have to care for them or use up valuable resources for the cold winter months. The tale was so unbelievable that Stevens had assumed it to be some sort of joke. Adding to the mystery was the fact that Stevens' late mother, who was a compulsive newspaper clipper, had neglected to note when or where the story had even been published. Eventually, Stevens took this mysterious story to the Rutland Herald, which published a report including complete transcript of the clipping in May of 1939. The Boston Globe, Yankee Magazine, and the Old Farmer's Almanac all followed up with their own accounts. No one knew what quite to make of the tale, though some reputable big city researchers had wondered whether this supposed folk medicine from the hills of Vermont was real or fake. One account of such events comes from one of the early newspaper articles printed on the subject. The story of a man who was only identified as A.M. stated his story by declaring, and I quote, "I am an old man, and I have seen some strange sights in the course of a roving life, in foreign lands as well as in this country, but none so strange as the ones found recorded in an old diary kept by my dear Uncle William." A.M. wrote that initially he was skeptical of his Uncle William's account, which apparently chronicled events from the 1800s, but he became convinced of its truthfulness after personally visiting the town where the events had occurred and verifying the facts with a witness. He said the small town was about 20 miles from Montpellier, and he had written saying, "It seems that the dwellers there who are unable, either for age or other reasons, to contribute to the support of their families, are disposed of in the winter months in a manner that will shock one who reads this diary." While arriving one day in the month of January into this poor town, the author describes the site in person, writing, "6 persons, 4 men and 2 women. One of the men crippled, about 30 years of age. The other 5, past the age of usefulness, lay on the earthly floor of the cabin, drugged into insensibility. The men and the women were then stripped down to a single garment and carried outside into the snow. I watched as the bodies began to lose their color, and when the townsfolk re-entered the cabin, I was shocked to find my host engaged in everyday conversation, as if something strange and ghastly weren't happening just outside. Seated on a single block, I passed the dreary night, terror-stricken by the horrible sights I had witnessed." The next morning, the diary describes as he watched his host lay the frozen bodies with a cloth over each face and a layer of straw over their entire body, then place them in stacks inside of a wooden crate, which was intended to protect the bodies from animals and other scavengers. Then, using a sled, the townspeople dragged the crate to the foot of a ledge on a mountainside, where during the winter it would be buried by a 20-foot snowdrift. The diary writes again, "I left the mountaineers, living and frozen, to their fate, and returned to my home in Boston, where it was weeks before I was fairly myself, as my thoughts would return to that mountain, with its awful sepulture." While flipping through the diary, A.M. had learned that his Uncle William had returned to the town the following May. It describes how William watched as the townspeople removed the bodies from the crate and carried them back into town, where they then immersed the bodies into lukewarm water in troughs fashioned from hemlock trunks. The diary reads, and I quote, "Nearby, cauldrons of water, tinged red by steeping hemlock boughs, boiled over a fire. This water was then used to raise the temperature in the troughs. As the color began to return to the bodies, people kneeled and tried to rub the life back into them. Slightly twitching of the muscles of the face and limbs, followed by audible gasps, showed that life was not quenched and that vitality was returning." William would write that the once frozen people were then given shots of liquor, and gradually they began to mumble, then talk, and finally sit up into their troughs. They were then led to the house for a springtime feast. As William described, they appeared no worse for wear during their winter's hibernation and appeared as they did the year before. This tale would be repeated throughout the years and would be scrutinized far and wide by medical science, deemed impossible or that of science fiction, that reanimation or human hibernation could never be achieved. But as we look around, there may be slightly more validity to the potential possibilities of such a feat, as we currently look at the science and technology of cryonics.
Person, turn them over to us, we're going to protect the cells and we're going to store the patient at extremely cold temperatures where they can have a chance of being revived in the future with more advanced technology.
Described as the experimental process of preserving a legally deceased person's body at extremely low temperatures after the point of death, with the goal of future revival. Currently, it's estimated that around 500 to 600 people have been cryogenically preserved worldwide as we speak today, with the majority being located in the United States, and with thousands more having already signed contracts or on waiting list hoping for future eligibility. Ted Williams, the baseball legend, after his death in 2002, was taken to an Arizona cryonics facility where he was neuro-separated into two pieces and preserved separately for hopes of future revival. Other famous and powerful people, such as longtime host Larry King and tech billionaire Peter Thiel, are both set and already scheduled to be preserved upon their death, with Larry seemingly changing his mind before his passing. The process of cryonics is of preserving human or animal bodies at extremely low temperatures, such as those of liquid nitrogen, with the hope of future technology being able to revive and restore them to health.
Kind of like asking someone in 1900, will it be possible to put someone on the moon? Well, a lot of people said, well, no, that's just science fiction. If you think about it, about 50 or 60 years ago, if you had a heart attack, you stopped breathing, people would check your vitals and say, oh, you're dead, that was it, we gave up on you. Today we don't do that. We'll jump on you and do CPR, defibrillation, and usually resuscitate the person. We want to have advance warning and have a team at the bedside so we can begin with no delay whatsoever. Once a doctor has declared legal death, and we have to wait for that point currently, we can begin the procedure by lifting the patient from the bed into our ice bath. We're going to cover them with ice and add water and circulate the icy water around the patient to accelerate the cooling. We're also going to restart respiration and circulation. The reason is we have to get a number of different medications into the patient to protect the cells. At this point, it's very much like donating organs. We're trying to keep the tissues viable for as long as possible until we can begin the next part of the procedure.
Although many who support the cryonics movement see the validity in the science, the widespread scientific community generally views cryonics with skepticism, citing irreversible brain damage from the lack of oxygen and the challenges of reversing the freezing processes and reanimating the body. Again, even though the scientific skepticism seems completely valid, why are such powerful people turning to such theories? Could our generation of people in the past have known something that we no longer have knowledge of? And again, skeptics would argue that it's been proved once you're declared dead for an extended period of time, there is no coming back. But what of the various news accounts of accidental freezing survivors, with that of people being found in freezing frozen temperatures in a state of death that somehow miraculously come back? One of those amazing cases was that of Gene Hillard in 1980. After Gene Hillard's car broke down in rural Minnesota in sub-zero temperatures, the 19-year-old Gene collapsed just feet from her friend's house. She was found 6 hours later, frozen solid, with her skin being rock hard, with doctors later describing that it was too solid for them to even pierce with a needle, and when they tapped the needle against her skin, a metallic noise came off. Emergency crews were called, and an ambulance carried Jean to the hospital with reportedly her heartbeat only beating 12 times per minute. The doctors slowly warmed her with heating pads and massaged her in what seemed to be a futile effort of saving this frozen girl. But doctors believed in their effort and continued their treatment, and slowly but surely, Jean would eventually regain consciousness, and after a long stay in the hospital, would walk away with no physical damage. Her survival would be described by doctors as a form of suspended animation, where her slowed metabolism was able to preserve her organ function and keep her alive, even though she was frozen solid. Another incredible example comes from a woman named Anna Bagholm in 1999. While she was skiing in Norway, the 29-year-old radiologist would fall through the ice and into a frozen stream, where she was trapped under the ice for approximately 80 minutes and had entered cardiac arrest. When she was eventually rescued, her core body temperature was a record low at 56 degrees Fahrenheit. Medical staff at the hospital used a bypass machine to warm and re-oxygenate her blood, eventually and miraculously bringing her back to life. She would be able to make an almost full recovery after a year of physical therapy, and her case would highlight the potential of therapeutic hypothermia. And our last, most contemporary account comes from 2015, when Justin Smith, a 25-year-old man, after a night out with his friends in Pennsylvania, was found unconscious and without a pulse in a snowbank after being exposed to sub-zero temperatures for at least over 12 hours. Although having no pulse, doctors refused to give up on him, citing the saying, "You have to be warm to be dead." Believing the fact that Justin was still frozen, there was hope. He was hooked up to an ECMO machine that pumped and oxygenated his blood, and which slowly warmed him up and eventually restarted his heart. Justin would lose parts of his toes and fingers to frostbite, but would otherwise make a full recovery, again proving that once frozen, the potential to be revived was there.
Like this it's amazing. It's something I've never heard of, and I can't thank everyone enough.
Smith lost all his toes and both pinky fingers, but has since made a near complete recovery.
It was like I woke up from a dream, but it wasn't a dream, you know?
And Larry, you were asking, well, what was he doing out there in the first place? He was walking home from a party, a walk he has made 1,000,000 times. They think possibly he slipped, hit his head, and was just stuck out there unconscious. Now, his body was frozen solid. As crazy and morbid as this sounds, just like you have meat in the refrigerator, if you want to preserve it, you put it in the freezer.
So is that what's in his brain?
I was going to say his brain is fully functioning?
That's the part they can't figure out. It seems as if his body was frozen solid. So it was preserved, essentially. When the body heated up, the body came back alive.
I mean,
literally,
this really
is what happened.
In 2 hours of CPR.
And the doctor
That's
didn't give
incredible.
up. They said this could possibly change
that's the real
history
in the story.
moving
They
forward.
didn't give up.
All those
How they treat-
cryogenics people are going to...
We can live forever.
Again, these accounts highlight the potential to a tale such as the Vermont Deep Freeze and that of Human Hibernation. A very interesting and fascinating thought to ponder, but as we know of now, ultimately an impossible achievement in our current lifetime, but maybe not unfathomable. Maybe some of us will live to see it. And guys, that'll do it for this episode on the Vermont Deep Freeze or the Vermont Deep Sleep and Human Hibernation. I really want to thank you if you've listened all the way to the end. If you like content of this nature, please consider subscribing. So thank you guys very much.